Havana welcomed me with a heavy, humid breeze and an unfamiliar scent. At first, I couldn't quite place it. A mix of ocean air, cigars, and something sweet, but with a touch of bitterness. I arrived early in the morning, and the city seemed half asleep, as if it were just stirring from the night's slumber. My travel bag hung over my shoulder, and along with it, a growing feeling of anxiety, tinged with excitement. There were meetings to attend, opportunities to explore, and things to take care of, but above all, there was Sophia. She was waiting for me at the airport exit. Her black hair pulled back tightly into a bun, her gaze cold and emotionless. At that moment, I had no idea that this icy demeanor would soon become a challenge for me. "Daniel?" she asked, her tone as impersonal as a customs officer checking someone in. "Yes," I replied, trying to force a smile, but as my hand reached out to greet her, it froze halfway. Sophia didn't extend her hand in return. There was no greeting, no playful glint to her eyes, just a look that suggested tiredness, though with a hint of something else, something almost imperceptible. She was the local coordinator for the festival, and I needed her guidance to navigate all the logistics I knew nothing about. But in the minutes that followed, it felt like there was more between us than just work. There was an invisible tension, a delicate thread pulling between us, as though we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. "I've arranged a car for you," she said, her eyes averting as if shielding her thoughts. Her voice was even almost chilly, but there was something about it that set me on edge. She spoke flawless English, but her accent was light, just enough to color her words with a hint of Cuban warmth. "Thanks," I said, the word coming out clipped, as something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Was it fear? Or maybe just a feeling I couldn't place? As we walked toward the car, I struggled to find something to say. The silence stretched longer than it should have, a small gap that felt oddly uncomfortable. Once we were in the car, Sophia turned toward me and asked, "How do you like Havana?" Her tone made it seem like a test. "I haven't had much of a chance to see it yet," I replied, gazing out at the houses passing by, their colorful facades faded like old photographs. Everything felt oddly familiar, yet new, like something from a forgotten dream. Sophia gave the faintest smile, the first since we'd met, and it was loaded with hidden meaning. "I think you should get to know it. How about a walk this evening?" she suggested. Her words sent a chill through me. The invitation sounded simple enough, but there was something about the way she said it, like it wasn't just an invitation for a stroll. I think that was when I first realized there was more to our connection than a shared interest in art and the festival. In her eyes, I saw a spark, a challenge. She was testing me. I understood that. "Of course," I replied, feeling my pulse quicken, as though I already knew something unexpected was waiting ahead. We made our way toward the city center, where the streets buzzed with both tourists and locals. It felt like there was something inevitable waiting around each corner. Then I noticed a man in a gray shirt trailing us, the third time I'd seen him along our route. At first, I thought nothing of it, but his stare was too focused, too intent. I decided not to mention it to Sophia, but a sense of unease settled in. It only grew stronger when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Lena, my girlfriend back home. I couldn't ignore her calls, even though lately her voice had turned cold, edged with frustration. She went on about work and financial troubles, and I knew that even as we spoke, part of me was still caught up in the uncertainty of our future. But now, standing there with Sophia, I suddenly felt the weight of the choice I had made. I was here in Havana, and it felt like my heart was at a crossroads, each path seeming both right and wrong at the same time. Just then, Sophia turned toward me and casually asked, "Would you like a drink? I know a place." I nodded, and we made our way to the nearest bar. It was there, as she began talking about her life, that I sensed our conversation drifting into risky territory. "You know," she said, flashing that strange smile again, "I think we need to stick together if you want to make it here." Her eyes sparkled, and I felt my heart skip a beat. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And in that moment I knew this wasn't just a casual evening in Havana. The morning came unexpectedly. I woke up in my hotel room with a vague sense of unease that only grew stronger as the day went on. Havana's night had hidden more than I realized. The city seemed to whisper to me, just out of reach, as if trying to warn me of something. But I couldn't understand it. The feeling from the night with Sophia lingered, leaving a strange aftertaste. I remembered the way she looked at me when she spoke those words in the bar. Stick together. That tone, soft yet filled with doubt. I woke up several times during the night, her image haunting my thoughts, replaying over and over again. What had she meant? And why had I agreed to meet her at her house? The day started with business meetings, festival arrangements, and navigating the stifling heat of the streets. Sophia was nearby, but her demeanor had shifted. There were no more smiles, just businesslike glances. She hid her tension behind a professional mask, though sometimes it felt like she was avoiding my gaze. When our eyes did meet, I saw something unfamiliar there. Anxiety, maybe, or a hidden agenda. "There's a dinner at my place tonight," she said at the end of the day, after another meeting with the festival representatives. Her voice was dry, as if it were just another business matter. But I caught the hesitation in her tone, that faint trace of doubt. "Should I come?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though uncertainty stirred within me. It felt like invisible strings were pulling me in the wrong direction. "Of course," she answered quickly, offering a faint smile. "We need to go over a few important details about the festival." But that smile didn't seem entirely sincere. There was something hidden behind it. By evening, I stood in front of her house, an old but well-maintained colonial-style mansion with wooden shutters and wrought iron grills. The sky was darkening with thick gray clouds, hinting at rain, but it felt like the shadow wasn't just coming from the sky. Sophia opened the door and invited me in. Her eyes were softer than before, and she seemed more at ease, as if she'd let her guard down just a little. Her evening dress accentuated her slim figure, and I couldn't help but notice how her hands trembled slightly as she handed me a glass of wine. We sat at a small round table, and the conversation flowed naturally. We started with business, then moved to art, and I felt the distance between us gradually dissolve, each sip of wine making the chat more personal. She began to open up about her life, her childhood, her failed marriage, the difficult decisions she had made in her career. "I always felt alone," she said, her eyes catching the dim light of the room. "Even when I was married, I felt like I was behind a glass wall, seeing everything but unable to touch it." There was pain in her voice, and it was so genuine that I felt an overwhelming urge to comfort her. I knew that feeling, being next to someone but still feeling utterly alone. I instinctively reached out for her hand, a small gesture of reassurance, but her skin was warm, almost too warm. The touch seemed to cross an invisible boundary. Sophia looked up, her eyes filled with both anxiety and something else. Hope, perhaps. Before I could process what was happening, I leaned in and kissed her. An electric charge pulsed between us. Sophia kissed me back, but then, as if startled, pulled away, her expression conflicted. In her eyes, I saw a mix of fear, desire, and pain, like a painting full of layers. She stood up and left the room, leaving me at the table in a whirl of confusion. I could feel my emotions unraveling, knowing that I had crossed a line, but unsure of what I truly wanted from this moment. My heart was racing. My thoughts were tangled. After a few minutes, Sophia returned. Her face was serious, but I noticed her hands were trembling. She spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. "That was a mistake," she said, but there was hesitation in her voice. In her eyes, I saw more than just regret. There was something deeper, like a challenge or perhaps hope. We both understood that things couldn't go back to how they were. The situation had become too complicated, and we didn't know where it was headed. What I did know was that this evening had changed something between us. The game had started, but its rules were still unclear. Who would win? Who would lose? The next day was filled with an unspoken tension. The morning crawled by, and that same anxiety that had haunted me since I arrived in Havana seemed to settle over everything. Everything felt strangely slowed, as if the air itself had thickened and the sunlight weighed heavier. Sophia and I met for another business meeting with the festival representatives. The room was thick with the scent of coffee and tobacco, but there was something else in the air, something undefined, like a storm brewing just below the surface. Sophia maintained her professional composure, but I noticed every little movement, every small nervous gesture. She avoided my gaze, her answers curt, almost clipped. The tension between us grew like a coiled spring, ready to snap. When the meeting ended, I made a decision. I couldn't stand this anymore. The secrecy, the half-truths. I needed answers. Why was she acting this way? Why did she pull me close one moment and then push me away the next? As we left the building, I decided to confront her. "Sophia," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. She slowed her pace, but didn't stop, didn't even look at me. "What?" she asked, her voice flat, as if she knew exactly what I was going to say. "I need to understand," I said, hesitation creeping into my words. "Why all of this? Are you hiding something?" She stopped, as if I had struck her with my words. She turned to face me, and in her eyes, I saw a flash of irritation, quickly replaced by something more complex, almost desperate. "What exactly do you want to understand, Daniel?" she asked, her chin lifted. "Do you think I'm playing games with you? That I have some kind of plan?" Her words hit me hard, and despite the harshness, I sensed a tremor in her voice. "I don't know what to think," I admitted. "You're acting so strangely. Yesterday, that kiss." She took a step closer, her face now serious. "I didn't want it to happen like that," she said quietly. "But now, it doesn't matter, does it?" Her words hung in the air, and I suddenly realized that there was something she was hiding, something in her eyes that I couldn't quite grasp. "Tell me the truth, Sophia," I insisted. "Why did you invite me here? What's all this about?" She sighed deeply, and her shoulders sagged, as if the weight of whatever she was carrying had become too much. "You don't understand, Daniel," she said, her voice weaker now. "It's more complicated than you think." I could feel something stirring inside me. "Then explain it to me," I demanded, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I was boiling. "Help me understand what this is about." She looked away, almost as if searching for something that wasn't there. After a long pause, she made some internal decision and finally spoke. "Fine. Meet me tonight at a quiet cafe by the ocean. I'll explain everything there." The cafe by the ocean was peaceful, with the soft sound of waves crashing against the rocks. We sat at a corner table, the silence stretching between us. The tension seemed to build again, an invisible wall rising between us. Sophia remained quiet for a long time, absent-mindedly twisting a napkin in her hands until she finally spoke. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was playing with you. I used you to keep my position, to protect myself from those who wanted to discredit me. But it's not what you think. I didn't want this." I looked at her, and in her eyes, something stopped me cold. Anger and disappointment clashed with something else, something that seemed almost real. "So you were just using me?" I asked, the bitterness rising within me. Sophia shook her head. "No." Everything got out of control," she said, her voice breaking as her eyes misted over. "When I realized you were starting to trust me, it was already too late. I didn't know how to stop. And now, I don't know what to do either." Her voice wavered, and I could feel my anger shifting into confusion. "Why can't you be honest?" I exclaimed. "Why can't you just tell me what's really going on?" Sophia met my gaze, and I saw fear in her eyes. "Because I don't know myself," she whispered.
"Im confuset."
"Everything went wrong. I thought I could control the situation, but then you—" She trailed off, but stepped closer. Her eyes were filled with tears, and suddenly, her hand touched mine. Her fingers curled gently around mine, and the touch was so real, all my thoughts disappeared. I couldn't hold back any longer. I stepped forward and kissed her again. This time, the kiss felt different. When we pulled away, her eyes were full of tears. "I can't," she whispered, but I didn't know what that meant. Was she afraid to trust me? Or had she just decided to end whatever this was? I stood there, silent, not knowing how to respond. Inside, everything felt like it was falling apart. I had no idea what to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. What we shared was real, no matter how dangerous or complicated it had become. Sophia stepped back and left, leaving me alone with the crashing waves. I stood there, watching her walk away, realizing that everything between us had grown even more tangled. I wanted to forget it all, to walk away, but something deep inside kept pulling me back, to her, to this mystery, to this woman who was challenging everything I thought I knew about myself and the world. She was gone, and I was left standing there, knowing that nothing would ever be simple again. I looked out at the sea, and it felt like it was calling me, urging me to step into the unknown. The next morning, a knock at my hotel room door pulled me from my thoughts. Expecting a hotel employee or a courier, I opened it to find Alexis, one of the festival organizers. A senior manager, he always had a sharp, perceptive gaze. His face was serious, like he was carrying bad news. "We need to talk," he said, getting straight to the point. I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in, trying to figure out what could have happened. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Alexis entered, closed the door behind him, and quickly scanned the room as if measuring my readiness for what he was about to say. "There are rumors," he began cautiously. "Bad ones. It seems there have been some changes in the festival's leadership. Someone's trying to have you removed, using whatever they can to ruin your reputation." A cold shiver ran down my spine. At first, I thought of Sophia. Could this be her doing? But then I realized these changes could have come from other people too. Havana, I thought, a city with a lot of hidden faces and agendas. "Who's behind this?" I asked, tension building in my chest. Alexis hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "It seems like Victor Rios is behind it," he finally said. "Your presence here bothers him. But, interestingly, Sophia seems to be connected to him in some way." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. Victor Rios, Sophia's ex-husband. A powerful figure in the local art world, with connections far more dangerous than I had realized. Why hadn't Sophia told me about him? Why had she allowed me to get tangled in this mess? "What do I do now?" I asked, more to fill the silence than hoping for some helpful answer. "I'd advise you to stay away from anyone tied to Victor," Alexis said. "And be careful with Sophia. I'm not sure whose side she's on." Alexis left, leaving me to grapple with my thoughts. Anger and confusion churned inside me. I needed to see Sophia and get to the bottom of all this. It couldn't be a coincidence that she appeared in my life just as these problems began to surface. We met in a park, where the shadows of the trees hid us from the occasional passerby. Sophia stood by a fountain, staring into the water, like she was looking for answers there. She looked tired, but still beautiful, her face reflecting the same inner conflict I was feeling. I walked up to her and, without any introduction, spoke sharply. "Do you know about Victor?" She lifted her head, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" "I know he's trying to get me removed," I said, anger creeping into my voice. "Are you working with him? Is this all part of your game?" Sophia shook her head, her face turning pale. "No, Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but earnest. "I didn't know. I've been trying to stay away from him since we broke up. He's always been controlling, always knew how to use people. But I swear, I didn't know he would go this far." Her voice sounded genuine, but doubts lingered in my mind. "And yet, you decided to use me to protect yourself?" She sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging. "Yes," she admitted softly. "But not the way you think. I thought I could stop him. That maybe if we were together, I could help you. I didn't know it would go this far." Her words were believable, but something felt off. "Why didn't you tell me?" I pressed, my voice sharp. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Because I was afraid," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Afraid you'd leave? Afraid he'd find another way to hurt me." Her words pierced through me, but instead of calming me, my anger only grew. "I'm not a pawn in this game, Sophia. I won't be your shield against Victor. She stepped back, tears welling in her eyes, but she held herself together. I understand, she whispered, but I don't want to be a pawn in his game either. That was when I realized I couldn't just walk away. I had to find the truth, but not from her. From Victor himself. I decided to take matters into my own hands and investigate what was really going on. I'll handle this, I said coldly but with a firm resolve. But remember one thing, if I find out you've been lying to me, it's over. She nodded, her expression serious. I could tell she understood that this was no longer just about her. There was far more at stake. We stood there, surrounded by silence and the shadows of the park, each of us aware that the truth was drawing closer. My investigation turned out to be more complicated than I had anticipated. I started asking people who had interacted with Victor, who had mentioned his name in conversation, who he was connected to. Each step led to more questions, and I realized that Victor wasn't just an influential figure. He manipulated people and situations so expertly that a web of intrigue followed him everywhere. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Sophia was more entangled in all this than she had let on. But at the same time, I saw how she was trying to break free from her past, from Victor, the man who seemed to hold her in a vice-like grip. I felt my own inner demons resurfacing. I was torn between my desire to uncover the truth and the fear that the truth would destroy everything I had come to believe. With every conversation and meeting with Sophia, our connection became more tangled, more profound. It became impossible to tell what parts of our relationship were real and what parts were simply manipulation. But one thing was certain, I couldn't walk away now. I had been pulled into a game with high stakes, and I wouldn't back down until I knew everything. The moment of truth came when I found myself face to face with Victor Rios, a man with a calm demeanor and a penetrating gaze, his thin smile stirring a deep anger within me. We met in his office, a cold, sterile room lit by narrow windows that allowed only a sliver of daylight. He seemed perfectly at ease, as if everything around him was well under control. "Daniel, it's a pleasure to meet you in person," he said smoothly, but there was an underlying threat in his voice, a subtle tension, like a stretched wire ready to snap. "I've heard good things about you." My anger surged. "So, this is what it's all about. You're still trying to control her, aren't you?" His face remained unreadable. "Sophia has always been a valuable asset," he said, his tone flat, as if he were talking about a collectible. "But she makes mistakes. One of them is you." I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor," I shot back, my voice echoing in the empty room. Victor slowly rose to his feet and moved closer, his eyes now cold as steel. I stood my ground, trying to keep my composure. "I will do whatever it takes to find out the truth," I said. "And if that means exposing you, so be it." He smiled, but it was anything but friendly. I left his office, furious, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. Victor had used everyone, including Sophia, to maintain his hold on power. But I still couldn't understand where her true loyalties lay. I knew I had to speak with her and get to the bottom of it all. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of Havana, a place always free from crowds. Sophia looked worn out, her eyes heavy with fatigue and fear. I sat down across from her and didn't waste any time. "I met with Victor," I said bluntly. "He's threatening both you and me, and I need to know what you really want." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting somewhere far off. Finally, her voice came, soft and almost inaudible. "I wanted to get away from him, Daniel. I wanted to leave it all behind, but I couldn't. Victor, he always knew how to hit my weak spots. And when you came into the picture, I thought I might have a chance to start fresh." Her words hit me hard. I saw the pain in her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly. "But everything went wrong," she finished, her voice almost breaking. "You used me," I said, my voice sharp, not softening the accusation. "But why couldn't you just be honest with me from the start?" She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "I was afraid of losing this last chance." "You are different, Daniel," she continued, her voice laced with emotion. I thought I could be real with you, but Victor, he was always there, like a shadow. I sighed, feeling my anger slowly shift into something more understanding. What now? I asked. Do you want to stay with him or not? She cut me off, her voice firm. I can't go back to him, but I can't stay in this city either. Everything here is tied to him, his power, his manipulation. I need to leave. Something twisted in my chest. What about me? I asked, even though I knew the answer would hurt. She shook her head. You need to stay, Daniel. You have a job, a career. You don't need to run like I do. But if I stay, he'll never leave us alone, I said, knowing she was right. Her eyes met mine with a determination that I couldn't deny. She had made her choice, and it was one that left me feeling lost. I didn't want to lose her, but I knew our relationship was too dangerous for both of us. Then go, I said, the words heavy in my mouth. But know this, I'll never stop thinking about you. She reached for my hand, her fingers brushing mine. Thank you, Daniel, she whispered. You gave me hope that I could escape this. I'll never forget you. We sat in silence, understanding that this was the end. Sophia stood up and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I knew it was over, but I also knew that this wasn't the end of everything for either of us. I stayed in Havana, and Victor vanished from my life as suddenly as he had entered, as though he had realized I was no longer a pawn in his game. The festival went on, despite the chaos surrounding it. I chose to stay in this strange, captivating city, full of mysteries and hidden corners. I stood by the ocean, breathing in the salty air, feeling the waves crash against the shore as if washing away the remnants of the past. I felt both a sense of liberation and a quiet loss. I knew Sophia was somewhere far away, but a sense of uncertainty remained between us. This wasn't the end, I knew. The new path ahead of me was unclear, but I was ready to face whatever it had to offer. Havana had become my new home, a city of shadows and secrets, and I was prepared to start over again, no matter what.